Okay, looks like everything's up and running. So I'm starting this a little bit early today because it's my channel, so I can kind of do stuff like that. And I thought that maybe April 1st would be a good day to start all this. Okay, and I need to go and change something because I am hearing myself in an echo. Doo-doo-doo. There we go. All right, so I'm figuring out how all this works as we go. But what I wanted to do today was answer some of your questions that you've posted on various videos that I've provided to you. And I wanted to do this live because I really want to do something where it's just very in the moment and I just answer your questions as if you came into one of my classes and I was just talking to you. So that's really the goal of this today, is to introduce this new series, which I'm going to be doing hopefully every week. So for those of you that know me, my name is Kevin Ure, and I'm a composer, music theorist. I do a lot of ear training classes. I teach music theory. I used to be a professor at university for about 8 years, and I ended that term as a visiting assistant professor. And so for those of you that know what that means, it essentially means that I was full-time faculty towards the end of my term there. And a visiting position is usually reserved for when a school needs some sort of expertise or specialty that they don't have. It can also mean a lot of other things, though. It can sort of be an interim position in between when you're maybe moving from adjunct to full-time, which is honestly pretty rare in a university. It tends to be that if you want to go full-time, you have to go to another university for that. But it can also be that they want particular expertise that they don't currently have, or they're just overbooked and they don't have time in the schedule for some of the established theory professors to teach those courses. So the courses that I typically taught there, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself here, but I typically taught all the first year music theory and ear training courses. I would teach counterpoint, form and analysis. There was a composition seminar that I was in charge of at one point, and I also taught Schenkerian analysis and 20th century music techniques. So I taught everything from the undergraduate to the graduate level, and I got a lot of really great experience doing this. And so when it came time to, decide whether or not I wanted to continue at the university, when they decided that the position had to be discontinued, I decided that, now is a good time for me to take all this expertise and to start just sharing it on YouTube. So that's what I'm doing right now. And really my goal here is to put as much content as I can online. So every time I did something at UNLV, I created two versions of a course. The first version was for my students, because there's certain aspects of teaching university, like curriculum review. You can't simply make up your own curriculum. You can't just choose any old textbook unless it is approved, especially for the core classes like Music 101, Music 102, Music 201, 202, those entry-level courses that a lot of music majors have to take. So you have to be able to go in and say, I'm going to teach using generally the books that they want you to teach with. But when it came to courses like counterpoint, form and analysis, 20th century techniques, Schenkerian analysis, I had a lot more freedom to choose the books that I wanted to use. But at the same time, I always felt like there's just so much to cover in these subjects and there's not enough time. And so what I really wanted to do was create courses that were allowed me to teach the way I wanted to teach, where I didn't have to, in one semester, effectively have all the music majors on the same page with ear training, where they all could identify all the simple intervals, all the major triads, basic chord progressions. I mean, these were the goals. And what would happen was we would have to move so quickly that some students excelled and some students did not. And I always felt kind of bad for the students that needed a little more training, because it's not really their fault. They may be exceptional musicians on their instrument, but they don't have the ear training skills and necessary background to be able to really handle those college courses yet. And so for me, I really believe that a degree is a useful thing to have. But if you want to be a musician, you want to be out in the world playing music, I think that the skills are still more important than the piece of paper, unless, of course, you want to teach, in which case that piece of paper is necessary. So my goal is to really take everything that I know as much as possible from a technical standpoint and also from a creative standpoint and turn it into these courses. I mean, that's what the Staff Speaks is. The Staff Speaks starts with the staff system. Very simple. It's going to go into rhythm, and there's going to be a total of 50 courses there. And by the end of it, you would have the equivalent knowledge of somebody who went through and got a doctorate in music theory. But here's the thing about it. When you get an advanced degree like that, then you tend to work on your own projects. You tend to have a thesis. You tend to specialize in particular things. So there's also a lot of experiences that come with a university situation where you have ensembles, you have peers you can work with. So it's not quite a graduate education, but it's the technical aspects of that education. It's the knowledge to understand how to analyze a piece. It's the understanding of how a composition is tied together. These unifying threads that we see in compositions, how composers use various patterns and different sequences, and how they use different theories to really create these really effective compositions. So that's what I'm teaching. I'm teaching these rudimentary skills that grow into really profound skills. So that's what the Staff Speaks is doing. And then I've got all these other courses, like, of course, Flawless and the Counterpoint, Audiation, and Form and Analysis course. So my goal is really take everything I taught at the university and give it to you in a way where I can add some additional context. It's not appropriate for a university setting, and go really deep into each subject and take my time. I want to take my time on these subjects, and it's fun for me, and people are finding that it's beneficial to them. So I'm happy. It's a win-win. So what I thought we might start with are some questions. And so I'm going to share my screen, and I'm not exactly sure how it's going to work. I might disappear and you might just see the questions, but we're going to start with that. I'm going to go through, and if anything pops up, I want to delve into more deeply, I will do that. All right, so here we go. So the first question that I have here is from Elmo93111. And Elmo asked on this perfect pitch drills playlist that I'm working on. It's really an experimental playlist. So a little bit of background. When I taught at the university, I noticed on average, and I would actually take pretty detailed notes, and because I had basically these guinea pigs. I mean, I taught over 1,400 students during the 8 years that I taught at the university. And so it was a really good opportunity for me to really find out what works and what doesn't. And what I discovered was a lot of the drills I was using, some of them in particular, could help certain students develop a sense of perfect pitch. And I had a few students that, they just unlocked perfect pitch because they always had it. They just didn't know they did. But then there were the students who had come in, and I mean, I had some crazy success stories where I had one student who I had absolutely no faith that they were ever going to develop their ear. And this student wasn't doing very well around midterms. And I kind of had a heart talk, and I said, I don't know that you can actually pass this course, but if you're able to pass an ear training exam, really our final exam, and you're able to get all the work in that you're missing, and had a conversation about all that, then I would take everything that you've done into consideration when determining your final grade for the course. And this student went from having an ear where they couldn't even identify basic intervals like a perfect fifth or an octave to being able to pass final exam. And it wasn't just the exam. I saw dramatic improvement each week, where week one, maybe a little bit of improvement, but 3 weeks later, I started to really notice this student is figuring this out. And I asked that student what they did at the end of it, and they said that they really started doing the mirror exercise I provided them. That's this repetitious exercise where you basically just sing an interval like a perfect fifth, bum, 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 things like that. Oh, I have to make one change here. We have to, oh no, actually I don't, because this is not really a Zoom recording, or maybe it is. I'm going to go ahead and turn on original sound real quick. Because if I don't, if I sing or play the piano, you will not be able to hear me. Apparently in the Zoom setting, it's not in the place it normally is. All right, well, I'll figure that out next time, but for today, there just won't be any sound. So bottom line, this student did end up passing just barely, because a lot of the work hadn't been turned on in the beginning, but there was enough of a progression that I felt that this particular student could move on to the next course. But the way this student succeeded was mirror exercise every day on the intervals that they were having trouble with. They started with a perfect fifth, moved to a perfect fourth, major third, minor third. They went through the sequence that I recommend in my mirror exercises book. It's actually laid out in the sequence of intervals that I think is most effective. And then they also, I would record in class these ear training drills, which later became the basis for my flawless ear training course. And they would practice those every day until they had, effectively they were perfect on them. And this was enough in 6 weeks to be able to pass what was required of a music 201 course, that'd be a first semester music theory and ear training for undergraduates. And they went on and continued to be very successful. But what I have discovered is that the students that really apply themselves, there are certain exercises which I believe are more capable of creating perfect pitch than others. So these perfect pitch drills are just one of those lessons, that one of those exercises that I think can help develop perfect pitch, but they have to be done the right way. And this is what's so difficult about it, because if you simply take the perfect pitch drills and you sit there, you go through it, and the very first one, the one that this question is about, it focuses on the notes C and D. It's just two notes. It's actually really easy. There's a C, there's a D. You can start to kind of sense with, that was an A, with relative pitch, it's covered by my computer keyboard, but with relative pitch, you can start to figure out what these notes are, and you're not using any source of perfect pitch, because once I tell you where C is, it's really easy to find D, especially when I'm only playing two notes. It's a 50-50 chance, and I'm either playing a C or a D. You start to get really used to where they are and what they kind of sound like. So if you approach it that way, where you're using relative pitch, then no, it's not going to work. So this question is a really good question, because the person here is asking, wouldn't my brain be tuned after the first note? So it's just relative pitch. And the answer is yes, if you are listening to it that way. But I try to be clear in the instructions, but this is really an art as opposed to a strict do this and you'll get that result. Because what you have to do is try and ignore your sense of relative pitch. You have to try and ignore what you're actually hearing, which if we have relative pitch, that's what we're going to hear. We're going to hear the relationships between the pitches. And you have to sort of start to think, okay, if I play a C, hopefully this is coming through okay. By itself, I don't know how it's any different from A, from D, or from E, right? So by itself, it's just a note. But then if I compare it to a D, is there something different about the D? And the difficult part of this is if you try and focus in on what that D is, you try and hear the difference, that's when you lose it. It's this very subtle perception I found for people that can develop perfect pitch, where they're able to recognize on an almost non-thinking level the difference between C and D and E. And we can describe them a little bit. A lot of times, people with perfect pitch will tell me if C could be described, it feels kind of dull, almost clear. I think Rimsky-Korsakov described it as a sunny day. Of course, Rimsky-Korsakov was in a different time period. He may have been using a different tuning. So you got to consider all these factors, right? So bottom line, though, is that most people that have perfect pitch, when I play a C, they say it's kind of the most boring note. Okay, is that something that they have just developed over time from a cultural perspective, because C is viewed as kind of one of the more boring, easier scales, so therefore they see a C as being overused? Or is it because C has something plain and dull about it, almost clear, almost like in the middle of the note there's nothing there? So then often D is viewed as a little softer, like it wants to move somewhere. It wants to go somewhere special. I'm still looking for this original sound because I don't think you can hear this without that. I'm going to check for 1 minute because I want you to be able to hear this. But the idea here is that if you're using relative pitch, which is a very easy thing to do, then you're not approaching this in the best way, because you are using relative pitch, and that will never develop any sense of perfect pitch. So what we want to try and do, yeah, I can't find it, but what we want to try and do is we want to try and develop this ability to distinguish the subtle differences between C and D. So here's another example, a more obvious example. If I play a perfect fifth, it has a certain quality to it. It's open, right? It's clear. There's just something about it that makes it a perfect fifth. If I play a major third, there's somehow more energy to it. It's more harmonious. There's something about it that just sounds different. Even if you can't isolate the two pitches, there's something about the third, the major third, that's different from the perfect fifth. And so what the Flawless course does is it first introduces you to these sounds of intervals, and in a very slow, very easy way. But as you keep going through the course, what ends up happening is we start to develop a more active, almost more intuitive sense of these intervals where we don't have to think so much. And that's really the goal. If you have to think about the sound of a perfect fifth and you have to say, okay, it's Star Wars, or a perfect fourth is Here Come the Bride, then you will never be able to use it in a very practical way. Yeah, you'll be able to pass an interval test, but interval tests don't do anything for making you an actual musician, right? So what we want to do is approach it in a way where we're relaxed, where we're not thinking, where we are closing our eyes, and you're almost in that state right before you fall asleep. They call them the hypnagogic and hypnagogic states, where you can come in and out of sleep, right? That state where you're kind of passing that barrier, and you can almost hallucinate, or you can kind of have waking dreams if you're coming out of sleep. But the idea here is that if you can at first enter that state where you close your eyes and you relax so much that you're able to hear the sound of a C and the sound of a D, and you say, I recognize something slightly different about the C and the D. There's something about it. The C is softer, more dull, more clear, brighter, maybe. I don't know. Some people hear it as brighter. I hear it as kind of dull. The D, it's something edgy to it, and there's almost a sadness to D. And that's just my perception of it. Yours might be different. But if you can start to hear these individual notes and hear the differences, then what will happen is when you're out of that close to dream state, then you're more likely to hear it in real life. And one of the ways that you start to learn this, I mean, you've got these videos on YouTube, like listen to C for an hour and you'll develop perfect pitch because you'll memorize it. That will never happen. You will never listen to C for 12 hours or while you sleep and develop perfect pitch. And the reason for that is there's no actual input on your part. You're not hearing the sound of C, you're just hearing a pitch over and over again and trying to memorize it. And if you do memorize it, you may be using sort of your vocal cords or a sensation in your body to memorize it. All these things where, oh, well, I feel an E in my forehead. It may help you get close to the note. A lot of singers will do this, but it will not, that's not actual perfect pitch. We want something more than that. So I'm not saying you can develop perfect pitch, but I am saying that about 25% of my students, after a year of taking ear training with me, would start to develop perfect pitch. That's when I started. Towards the end of my time at the university, I actually discovered that even more, it would happen quicker. I'm going to do something real quick. Okay, so towards the end of my time teaching the university, I discovered that it would happen even more quickly. So it was after the end of the first semester that about 25% of people develop perfect pitch. And I started to figure out there were a few reasons for it. One, I used to do these daily routines pretty much every day. And the idea behind the daily routines is they'd start very simple. They'd always start on C, even though we did major and minor scales, things like that. And they'd go through the fundamentals. Because I always felt that in a theory classroom, you only have, for me, I had an hour and 15 minutes 4 times a week. And it doesn't matter if it's an hour, 15 minutes 4 times a week or 3 hours 2 times a week. I mean, depending on your schedule, if you're a professor in university, you can make it work. But I think you need at least 3 hours of dedicated time with your students each week to be able to combine a music theory and ear training course. But what I would do is I created these drills where we would go through them every single day, and they gradually get more difficult. And they'd introduce the intervals like the perfect fifth, the perfect fourth, major, minor third, major scales. And then we go into the minor, the natural, melodic, and harmonic minor scales. And we'd practice the various chords, like the basic 4 triads, major, minor, augmented, diminished, and our 7th chords. And we would drill these fundamentals every day, but every day we'd start on C. And what would happen sometimes very quickly over a few weeks collectively, I would tell the class, okay, here, we're going to start a daily routine, sing a C, just take a guess. And collectively, the class would generally sing the C on pitch. And so what I think part of the reason why this would happen is because we did the daily routines every day. So you're starting to see that, going back to that question, it's not just listening to the notes, it's also being active as a musician and practicing every day, right? And so the daily routines are another thing that you would need to do, I think, to start developing a little bit of perfect pitch. And the way you do them is you get your starting pitch, you can play the audio file along with them if you want to, or you can play it on the piano, and you just sing this drill. It takes less than 10 minutes and you're done. And then you do some mirror exercises on the interval that you haven't mastered yet. So I suggest starting with the perfect fifth, do it for a week, even if you already know it. And then you can go on to the perfect fourth, major third, minor third, and follow the sequence in my mirror exercises book. And so if you do that, you're getting 2 things. You're getting the daily routine, mirror exercises. And then if you add this pitch drill, the perfect pitch drills, my playlist here, which is free, then you can start to get closer to hearing these pitches. But I don't think the goal should ever be to try and develop perfect pitch, because perfect pitch is kind of like a fool's errand in a way. If you don't have it, you don't really need it. I'm going to just tell you a little story here. Oftentimes, what I would do in my ear training courses is, you have a student with perfect pitch and they appear to have no weaknesses. but there are certain things that people with perfect pitch naturally have difficulty with. And it can be trained, just like relative pitch can be trained. They can be trained not to have these issues. But one of the big issues was that if I was playing a sight singing exercise from the Ottman book, it's a common book that we use in colleges, right? It has hundreds of melodies that students have to learn to sing. And if I would have them transpose it up a step, up a third, down a third, and I made them sing it in a key other than what was written, they had trouble with that. And what I quickly realized was the issue here is that they don't really have a sense of relative pitch. They have perfect pitch. So they can sing the notes they see on the page, and generally they're pretty good. But if you ask them to transpose, now they have to do the mental calculation, change the key, and then they can transpose it. So they have to actually work on transposition usually. And then there's another thing that they tend to have trouble with, besides just reading pitch. I find that people with perfect pitch tend to have a little bit less perfect intervals. So if you ask them to sing a perfect fifth, they'll sing a perfect fifth, but it'll be slightly flat. One of the notes will be slightly off. And I think this isn't true for everybody with perfect pitch, but I do think that in some cases, maybe the perfect pitch skill is there, but it's not refined enough for them to be able to tell the relationship is off. And so they're singing a C, but they're singing a slightly flat C. They're singing a G and maybe it's slightly sharp. So you almost get a minor six there, you know? So there are difficulties with perfect pitch. And I think that a really good relative pitch and sense of relative pitch and a really highly developed sense of relative pitch is much more useful than perfect pitch. Because yeah, it'd be great to know the notes we're hearing all the time, but I think that if you still have to work on your ear, because if you don't have that relative pitch, that's what allows you to really improvise quickly and really play in tune and understand what's going on in the rest of the ensemble. Now, I'm not saying people with perfect pitch aren't exceptional musicians. They are, many of them, but perfect pitch doesn't make you an exceptional musician. It's not the one thing that you must have to succeed. And that's one thing that I really understood, I like to think, at the university, is that I could have students with exceptional skill. They can improvise, they can interpret music better than others. They can do a lot of things that, you know, other people with great oral skills can't do. But the degree programs, the way they're set up, is if you can't pass your ear training drills, then you can't really get the degree. And so that's why I put so much focus on these fundamentals, because I want to do it in a way where we move step by step and we make things very easy. So we're going to go on to another question, but the idea here is that if you, let's share the screen again. If you are using relative pitch for these drills, then what you're doing is another relative pitch drill, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that. You're doing a relative pitch drill. But what you need to try and do with these drills, to give an actual straightforward answer for this, is to kind of enter a meditative state and just be aware of the differences. The moment that you try and really focus in on pitches, that's when you tend to lose them. And I've heard this multiple times from people that do have perfect pitch, developed it on their own, or have taught people perfect pitch. A good example is David Lucas Burge. I took his relative pitch course when I was younger. I never really did the perfect pitch course, but I listened to a few of the talks on that, and he talks about this. He says that it's a very subtle hearing art, right? And I've heard that time and time again, even talking to other people that have developed perfect pitch on their own. So it's this subtle thing where you just have to kind of relax and try and recognize without getting too intellectually involved. The moment when you hear the difference between a C and a D, you're going to get excited. I mean, it's going to happen. You're going to say, oh my gosh, that's amazing. There's a difference between C and D, and I hear it clearly. And then it's gone. It's gone because once you try and hold on to it, you lose it. And so I think the only way to develop perfect pitch is to not know you're developing perfect pitch. And when I would teach this in my university courses, I think one of the reasons it would work was because I didn't tell them they're developing perfect pitch. I actually didn't know they were going to. I was trying to teach them relative pitch, but because I did it in such a methodical way and such a step-by-step way, I think it was easier for students to actually develop the ones that came to class and did the assignments, because I knew that there were students that were using ear training apps and doing other things to actually cheat. I mean, that happens, but for the ones that really put in the effort, they would see results. And it doesn't take much. Again, 30 to 45 minutes a day. You shouldn't do much more than that. So that's my answer for this, is you need to be very subtle about it. You need to not think too much about it, because the moment you think, you lose it. Okay, this one's funny. So I don't know if this person meant for it to be funny. It's Arik, Arikxul. That's the person that posted this, but they said, definitely having a nightmare tonight. And it's the most appropriate playlist to kind of say that to, because it's a minor second. And it is kind of funny because this is passive ear training for sleep, meditation, and work, 10 hours of intervals. And so if you're sitting there and listening to all these minor seconds, yeah, you might have a nightmare. I would not suggest that you actually listen to the more dissonant intervals unless you don't have a negative association with these intervals. Me personally, I could sleep with the minor second or the tritone and not have nightmares. But, use your own judgment on these. That's kind of what I'm getting at here. And maybe don't fall asleep to the minor second if it is a scary interval to you, right? And so I just thought that one was funny. So I just had to address that one. All right, so going on to another one. But anyway, thank you. Occasionally I get these really funny comments on YouTube. There was another one on kind of a shorts channel I have. It's just an experiment. I don't really like shorts. I think they actually kill a channel. I don't know, but it seems to be the case, because what ends up happening is YouTube just sends it to everybody. And so you end up sending it to people that have no interest in ear training. They're like, what is this? And on my other channel, I was doing this thing where I was playing an interval, and then on top, I'd ask them to identify the interval on top. So that's actually a perfect fifth. But it's made much more dissonant because of the notes below. And the person said, what is this? Music Theory 4000. So, people are funny. That's actually one of the reasons I love doing this YouTube channel, because the comments sometimes just make me laugh. And that's always a good thing. So anyway. All right. Eagle Eggs 3862. Again, on the perfect pitch drills, stage 1, focus on C and D. Okay, when listening, is a relaxed openness better, or all my focus and attention going to my ears, intensifying the experience? Okay, so this I've talked about a lot, so I can make this a little bit shorter, but yes, a relaxed openness is always better. For these drills, for relative pitch, you can focus, and I think you should, because with relative pitch drills, what you want is kind of this intense focus for a period of time, and then you relax. You come back the next day, and then hopefully it's easier. Because what will happen is the brain will say, oh, it's trying to learn the sound of this interval. I have to pay attention, right? So with relative pitch, you want to do that. You want to have kind of this intense focus at first, which later becomes more intuitive and easy. That's the goal with relative pitch. But when we're talking about perfect pitch again, when listening, you want to just have that very relaxed experience. You just want to not get too deeply, worried about like, okay, I need to hear what C sounds like. I need to hear what D sounds like. I'm not hearing it. I have to focus harder. Don't do that. Just relax. Take the exercises. They're very short. And the reason they're short is because I don't want you wasting a lot of time trying to develop perfect pitch. Again, you're chasing a dream that may never happen. I'm just being honest here. That's why I probably will never do a perfect pitch course, because I don't think that it can be developed with a high degree of accuracy. There are certain drugs that they've discovered that you can actually give people, and it will unlock this ability to develop perfect pitch. So that's interesting and promising for the future. But right now, without going to pharmaceuticals, there isn't a great way to develop perfect pitch. But what these drills will do is they will open up your ear. And if you are so inclined to be able to hear the differences between these notes and recognize C for C, then they'll work for you. So I keep them short because I don't think you need a lot of time. I think if you're going to develop perfect pitch, it's really just coming in every day, practicing for a few minutes, and then going about and listening to music, playing music, living a musical life. I think that's more effective than spending 2 hours a day on perfect pitch. And why would you spend 2 hours a day practicing perfect pitch? I mean, honestly, play music, listen to music, enjoy music, develop your ear so that you can have a greater appreciation for music and so that you can get more out of it. But don't waste your whole day striving for this perfect ear and perfect pitch. Especially just come in every day, do the work, enjoy it, and don't get too bogged down by what you don't have or what you do have. You probably have some skill that others don't have. You probably have this ability to really hear deeply inside music, or you can phrase something in a way that appeals to others. You can interpret a piece. So just music is a lifelong thing, and I think it's useful to strive for some aspect of perfect pitch recognition, but don't make it something that you feel you have to spend hours a day on, because if you do, you're not going to hear it. I think you have better results from my experience with a few minutes of just kind of casual listening and just trying to say, is there a difference here between these notes? And then once you can get a certain amount of right row, you go on to the next one. I don't think you have to spend too much time on this. So let's look at another question. I'm not always going to do questions, but right now, for this first one on April Fools, I think maybe this isn't a bad way to go. Okay, so Queen_AV. If I and other musicians in my circle usually use 432 hertz tuning, is this still useful for me? So we're talking about introductory lesson A. First, I want to talk about introductory lesson A, B, and C, because maybe the question's in here, but I've had a few people have said A, B, and C were easy for me, and then the first real lesson was hard. Yeah, that's because A, B, and C are real foundational, explaining how the lessons work. And then the first real lesson is where it gets real. Okay. So don't worry too much if you find that the 3 introductory lessons are difficult, and then when you get into the actual course, it's more difficult. That's how it's supposed to be. And again, I want to reiterate that the rules for that have changed. It was always my intention to create a course where you could basically come in each day, take a lesson, then go on to the next one the next day. Well, that was a little bit beyond what I was able to create, I think. I have new rules for that, and I'm actually editing all the videos and publishing them on YouTube as I edit them to reflect a change. And that change is, if you get 100%, stop for the day, come back, go on to the next lesson. It's that simple. But if you don't get 100%, whatever you get, then just spend 3 days on each lesson. So you take lesson 1, you get like an 80%, whatever it is, come back for 2 more days, and then go on to lesson 2. If lesson 2, you get 100%, go on to lesson 3 the next day. Lesson 2, you get less than 100, do it for 3 days. Because here's the thing about this. I am training you to never mistake these intervals for any other interval ever again. And you have 3 units where we deal with the perfect fourth and perfect fifth in different ways. And by the end of it, not only will you start to be able to hear chord progressions, you're going to hear deeper in music, you're going to be able to separate notes, things like that. But you're going to learn the sound of a fourth and fifth. because I think the first level is about 60 days worth of me just teaching you the perfect fifth. Now, if you spend 3 days, that's 180 days. That's 3 months. That should be enough time for most anyone. Now, if after 3 months you still don't have the perfect fourth or fifth down, I would still say keep going, because even when we get into level 2, which deals with the majors and minor thirds, and we start to deal more with actual triads, even when you get into level 2, there's still going to be exercises that keep working the fourth and fifth. So you can just take a leisurely approach. You come in, you focus, you do try your best. You don't just sit there and tune out, but you get through the lesson, and then you go about your day. And then you come back the next day, you do another lesson, or you repeat the same lesson, but never more than 3 days in a row. So again, the reason I did that, the reason it happened this way, was because when I stopped working at the university, my position was discontinued. That's what they told me, discontinued. But when it was discontinued, what happened was I said, you know what, I'm going to start taking this ear training course a little more seriously, and I'm going to create a version for the public. And I was actually doing that while I was teaching too. So maybe like the first year, but I didn't have a lot of time to put into these lessons. So sometimes it would be 1 to 3 weeks between lessons. And so in order to not lose the momentum and progress, I would say get 100%. But I always knew that 100% was not necessary, because each day we reinforce similar concepts in different ways. And your ear will naturally develop just by going from lesson to lesson. It's an easy, simple system. It's really like I come to your house every day and I test your ear and I help you develop it. Now, I can't tailor it to you. If I came to your house and we actually did ear training lessons every day, what would happen is maybe we'd go faster. I might introduce the major minor third sooner. I might introduce other concepts sooner. But the way the course is set up is to provide you with the sequence that is really easy to follow, right? One that would work for just about everybody. So some people will find some exercises are easier, some will find some are harder. And I'm going to get to this question, but I think this is important. The other thing I want to say is that people will often say, well, chord and interval is a hard drill for me. Can I just focus on that? And my answer is no, because you're approaching this as, in some ways, I want you to approach it as you would an instrument. You work on the things that are difficult. But really, at the core, what we want to do is we want to take everything holistically. All the exercises in each lesson, I carefully thought these out. They're based on my years of experience, and even before the university, when I was just doing this for myself and for my private students. So it's based on years of experience. It's very well thought out. And if you practice only one isolated exercise, you'll get really good at that exercise. But the other exercises are important too. Even if you find there's an exercise in there that's really easy, like there's one point where I play like a C or a D, kind of like I do in the perfect pitch course. And a lot of people say, well, that was easy. But what you need to understand is it's meant to be easy, because what we're going for is that most people can get about 80% of the exercises right. And then there's one exercise or two exercises or three exercises, depending on where you're at, that are more difficult. So you have to take them holistically. They all have to be done together from start to finish. And I would even say in the order I give them to you. So don't think too much about it. Don't break it apart into sections. Don't use chapters on these. Just press play, go through the exercise 3 days in a row or 100%, and then you move on. Those are the 2 ways you move on. And don't think about it past that. Go about your day. So if I and other musicians in my circle usually use 432 hertz tuning, is that still useful for me? My answer to that is yes, of course, because sometimes I will use a piano that's out of tune. And I'm fine with that, because if the piano's out of tune, you're still trying to develop perfect pitch and relative pitch, right? You're trying to develop this relative sense of intervals. And sometimes you will be listening to a recording where maybe harmonicity comes into play, and the top notes are kind of scrunched down. You lose some of the overtones, or maybe the players are just a little out of tune. You should still be able to hear effectively that a perfect fifth is within the realm of a perfect fifth. It doesn't have to be exactly in tune for you to recognize the perfect fifth. So if you just take it down by 8 hertz from A440 and you take it down to 432, there's nothing wrong with that. If you hear and train your ear on A440, which is what the majority of my exercises are, then you will still be able to hear the relationships at A432, relatively speaking. So don't even worry about that. And I know that A432, a lot of people believe that it's kind of a spiritual tuning. They like the way it resonates differently. And so, yeah, if you want to use A432 for your tuning, why not? Tuning is not a science. We decided the tuning frequency based on a panel, and so it used to be different. Back in the classical period, we didn't have standardized tuning, so it could change between performances. So yeah, don't worry about the tuning. It's still useful for you. They will still work. All right. So thank you for that question. All right. So Gringo Chucha, GRINGOCHUCHA. This is on Flawless Ear Train Unit 1, Lesson 4, Perfect Fifth and Major Chords. So this person asked, moving on from the lesson I was stuck on, this lesson was challenging but not overwhelming, and I did get about 85% right, so I'll stay here for a while. This was back, I think, based on my old suggestion, where you spend enough time to get 100% in most cases. The triad fifth exercise, yeah, chord versus interval, is only hard for me in the high register, but I guess that's normal. It is also in the low register. I think those high frequencies are the first ones we lose with age. Okay, yeah, but no. I mean, not the piano frequencies. We'll talk about that. And I'm not a spring chicken anymore, so there's that as well. I'm glad you're including the chromatic scale now. I love seeing it for some weird reason. Thanks for another great lesson. The chromatic scale is like a bath for the mind, because I was talking to, I always want to say Alfred Reed, but it's Samuel Adler. He came to the university one day and we were talking about ear training, and I didn't realize he actually has his own ear training method. And one of the things that he really focuses on is a chromatic scale. And I agree with him. We both kind of agreed that it works, because if you have a solid chromatic scale, then the other pitches start to lock in. That's one of the reasons why in my Flawless course at the end, like I think it's unit 14, 15, or 16, it's all mapped out, but I'm not there yet. I bring back the seconds and the minor seconds, because that's what locks everything in. And so here's the thing about this course. You may get to unit 7 and you'll definitely see changes, and you'll hear changes in your hearing. You will, but you may still think, oh, I'm never going to develop the ear I want. But it's not until we bring everything together at the end with these minor seconds, bring back the perfect octave, things like this, where you really develop that skill. And this is where everything comes together. And here's the thing that I just want to say. This is my argument, because people are like, oh, 16 units. I mean, unit 1 took me a year. Well, it shouldn't take you a year now with this new procedure, where 1 day per lesson, if you get 100%, 3 days if you don't, right? You'll move much faster. But let me put it to you this way. I know musicians, a lot of musicians, professional musicians, who don't have the ear they want, and they've been playing for 30 or 40 years, right? I know music students who go through school, they learn to pass a test, but they feel like they don't have a good ear. And they spent 2 years of dedicated time on ear training, okay? So 16 units, if you go through very actively, I believe you could finish in a couple years. So what is it worth to you? It is an investment. You don't have to go to a college to do this. All you have to do is press play on a video for 30 to 45 minutes a day, and your ear will get better. And in 3 or 4 years' time, you'll have a very different ear than you have now. And so is that worth it to you, right? Is it worth it to you to wait? And I know that we want results fast, but you know what happens when you get results fast? They go away fast too. So we are laying a foundation that will establish an ear that frankly will never go away once you have it. When I first learned the difference between the perfect fifth and the perfect fourth, and I truly learned it, I could never mistake it for another interval. to this day, I sometimes have vocal issues where I can't sing the interval, but I'm not a singer. But I will never mistake a fifth for a fourth, no matter what register it's in, you know. And I will never say never. I mean, I'm sure that sometimes I might, but it's very rare for that to occur. And I have to be very sick or tired or something has to be going on. And what I'm telling you is that if you approach this correctly, when you're done, ear training will be one of those things that you don't have to practice anymore because you do get it from your instrument, from playing, from listening to music, and it's worth it. So just keep in mind, a lot of musicians who have been playing for decades don't have the ear they want, and you can get it in a couple years. And I'm being realistic here. I am not going to come out here and say, develop an ear in 30 days. Run. Run if somebody tells you that. Because what you'll learn in 30 days is a trick that will work for a very particular type of music, and it won't work for everything. And you won't have a true foundational understanding, like the way you see color. If you're not colorblind, you know, when you see red, you don't ever say, I think it's red, but it might be green. You know, you might say, I think it's red, but it could be pink. Those are close, but you never say, I think it's red, but it might be green, right? And that's what I want to help you get with your ear training. I want you to get to that point. Okay. And so if you just go through this flawless course, and then if you add on some of the dictations, I have a practice dictations course I'm kind of working on as well. You don't have to do that one every week, but maybe once a week, try and do a dictation from there. And just take a relaxed, steady approach. You will develop an ear that takes you through the rest of your life. And even if you're at the end of your life, who cares? I mean, it's still something, I mean, not to say who cares, right? But this is still a worthwhile activity. It's something that improves your existence because you start to hear things. Even in movies, you'll be listening to some movies and you'll be like, oh, wow, I hear a lot of distortion and artifacts in there. It's because your ears open up. And that's maybe one other thing I'll address because this is kind of impromptu and there is no script here. None of this is planned other than the questions. I just copied and pasted them into a PDF here. But sometimes people get a little bit upset if the audio isn't perfect in one of the recordings. And a lot of these recordings are live. I really don't script things. This is something you should know about me. I do not script things. Often what I'll do, because I do have really bad ADD, I've been diagnosed like 5 times in my life, even as an adult, I will create bullet points. Because if I don't, I get off track, right? And so, like I'm doing right now, I'm getting off track a little bit. But what was my point with this? Yeah. See, I talked about ADD and now I have no idea. All right. Well, if it comes to me, I'll come back to it. Oh, I don't script things, right? So when I create these ear training programs and when I create my theory programs and things like that, now I'm starting to go through and I'll edit stuff because I'm getting better at using Final Cut Pro. But there's going to be external sounds. There's going to be artifacts in there. And I like that. I think that's important. Because if you train your ear in a sterile environment, then you lose some of the focus, right? Because there's nothing to distract you. It's really easy to sit in a perfectly pristine environment and hear a perfect fifth. It's much harder for me to go like this. And then what interval is that? And for you to actually hear, that's a perfect fifth, right? Because there's distortion in there. And so if you hear noise in the background, if there's some static in the recording and it makes it hard for you to focus in, those are the lessons that I like. You know, I want to keep some of that in there. And it's really hard to manufacture that. It's really hard to just create noise like that. So when it happens spontaneously, I'm fine with that. So those lessons will help you focus. So going back to this question about lesson 4 in unit 1, it was challenging. Don't stay there for a while. Move on. You're fine. As long as you've taken it 3 days in a row, move on. What you can do is if you find a lesson's difficult, just kind of make a note of it, right? Keep a little list and say, it took me 3 times to pass lesson 4 and I still don't feel comfortable. And then before the end of the unit, just go back and take each one of those lessons again. You could do that and see if you've improved. That would actually be kind of interesting for you. It's also kind of an assessment. And then you can get a little more practice with the ones that were more difficult. But the triad and fifth exercise, chord versus interval, is hard, and the high register is harder. We lose some of the overtones in the high register. So those are the frequencies you're missing out on. But in some ways, if you cut out the overtones, the intervals actually become a little more clear. So I wouldn't say that that's going to affect your ability to hear these higher intervals. And I don't know about your specific situation with hearing loss, or if you have hearing loss, there could be something at play there that would make these higher intervals even more difficult for you to hear. And this is why I say 3 days, move on, because maybe there's a situation where you'll never be able to hear the high intervals or the really low ones. The low ones you'll probably hear a little more easily if it's a hearing loss thing, but I wouldn't worry too much about that. Use them as an opportunity to see if you can hear within these frequencies and if you can make them out. So if you get one of them wrong, pause the recording, maybe go back 10 seconds and see if you can hear it correctly. That is the only way I suggest you practice these exercises. So if you want to go through and you don't want to just press play, you want to actually practice, then what I would suggest is, as you go through, and this is a great thing to do, when you get something wrong, pause the recording, go back about 6 or 7 seconds, listen to it again, and see if you can hear why you got it wrong. See if you can hear the correct answer. That would be useful. And the chromatic scale, yeah, the chromatic scale really ties everything together. So thank you for your comment. I really appreciate it. And it was a really good question that really sparked a lot of other questions for me. So thank you for that. All right. We have a lot of questions. So another question, what's audiate mean? Okay, so audiation is something I actually posted the first video in Audiation Essentials on this one, because the first video is what is audiation? You know, it's a 10-minute video. So the Audio Essentials course is the master class condensed into the most important points. So that's harsh it bad. I'm not gonna we could read that multiple different ways, but that's how I'm going to read your screen name. Anyway, so what's really going on here is that audiation course, the essentials course, is kind of a reduced version of the full master class. So the master class is really difficult. I mean, it's difficult because it's time intensive and it's really hard to keep your attention. But if you want to develop profound audiation skills, then you're going to have to work through some of that hard stuff. It's not easy. And there's an exercise in there that I believe is like 45 minutes long, and it just gradually adds more and more to a counterpoint solution, and you're audiating 2 lines. And people, they get through it. And from what I've heard so far, the people that have completed it, some of my composition students who of course get these courses for free with their lessons, and then some people who have just purchased it from outside sources, sometimes my website, they can find out other places too. The ones who've made it through, they say, yeah, my ear is finally, I'm starting to hear things internally very clearly. And I mean, I love that. When I hear people, like, I'm actually composing music in my head now and writing it down on paper. Okay, so again, it's a level of effort. I mean, how much time, how much effort, how much concentration can you put into something? Now, the nice thing with audiation is you don't have to do it every day. It's not like ear training. So you could take 2 years to complete the audiation course, or you could take 6 months. But the important thing with audiation is that you approach it a couple times a week, because this is one of those skills that the ear develops fairly easily, right? So it's one of those things where you come in, and as long as you're doing it a few days a week, you're building the pathways, because it's a more loose skill. Ear training is very specific. It's very focused. We're learning the perfect fifth, the fourth, major triad, things like that, right? Audiation's more all encompassing. It's like you're getting better at a skill that uses multiple faculties. And so you don't need to approach it as much. You just need to kind of introduce it to your brain. So audiate very simply. I get this question a lot. I feel like I explain it in the Flawless course because I think it's in one of the first 3 lessons, or maybe it's the first lesson. But there's a lot of content in these courses, and I get missing, 1 or 2 things, right? I would do it too. Again, ADD, right? So audiate simply means the ability to hear things internally. And you can get very pedantic about it, and you can say audiation requires you to be able to understand what you're hearing. So now we're getting into an aspect of ear training. But for me, the simple act of audiation is, can you recreate a song in your mind? That's kind of an entry level stage. Then can you create a song in your mind? That's kind of like a stage 2. And then stage 3 would be, can you create something in your mind, take it apart, put it on paper? So there's levels of audiation, in my opinion. But for my course, I use audiation as simply the ability to at first hear internally, and then eventually know what you're hearing and write it down and edit it and manipulate it. And I will just say one thing about audiation and ear train in general. One of the biggest factors that I've discovered through research that determines whether or not you will develop a good ear or audiation is your musical memory. And so we always want to try and develop a memory. And that's why the audiation course is so hard, because it is making you work on these exercises that frankly are impossible for most of us. Maybe Mozart could have done it. He could have listened to this 45-minute audiation recording that I have in there and memorized it. You don't have to do that. You just have to kind of approach it each day and go as far as you can. And then you do it with your own compositions. You try and memorize your own works. And, we talk about all these things in the audiation course, which, by the way, is now available on YouTube, the masterclass series. You can do a membership for it. So what I'm trying to do is, as I create these courses, there's a certain amount of investment required to create them. And so I kept them exclusive on my website. But then as they're complete, I really do want to share them. And so I make them more affordable. But in order for me to keep doing what I'm doing, I have to charge something, unfortunately. And so I hope they're useful to you. But I hope that answers your question about what does audiate mean. So I think we got some more questions here. And we're going to just keep going through these. I think in future sessions, I'll do this, but not the entire session. Just today, there's a lot. Okay, so we've already seen this one. All right, so Letitia -XJ4JQ. So dictation 3.7. Okay, F major. I was doing okay and getting all correct until 3.2. This is from the practice dictations playlist. Now I keep messing up the dictations. Should I go back? Should I continue? Do you recommend any exercise to complement and help the dictations? Thank you so much. Your content is high value. Oh, thank you. That's nice. I try. I don't know. It's not going to work for everybody, but I do try, and I put a lot of effort into these. And so I do hope that you do find these of value. So thank you for saying that. But here's the thing with the dictations. There are some dictations that are difficult. And you were talking about dictation 3.7 specifically. So if that's the one that you're having trouble with, that makes sense. You did say you're getting them all correct until 3.2. So within each dictation, they do get harder towards the end. And then the last one's always the hardest in each unit. So right now you're in F major. I can call it unit 3. It's the 7th exercise. That would have been the last one in F major. That would be the most difficult one. So my recommendation for this is, no, you don't have to go back. If you want to take another course, you should be doing the Flawless course. It's really meant to be taken alongside these dictations, but you can go on to unit 4. But what I recommend you do is, for any of the ones you're having trouble with, try and memorize it, and then come back the next day and see if you can notate it from memory, and just do that for a couple days and go as far as you can with it. So let's say you memorize the first measure on Monday. You come in on Tuesday, you still remember it, you write out the first measure, and maybe you get the first note of measure 2. So then you memorize 2 measures on Tuesday. come back in on Wednesday, you get this 2 measures, maybe a note or two for measure 3. Do that for like 3 or 4 days and then move on. Because what will happen, there's so many dictations, is eventually your musical memory will start to improve. But do your best to memorize each dictation. That will be huge for your development, because if you memorize them, you're getting them into your brain. It's really going to help you. All right, let's see what else we got here. It's kind of fun. Okay, we've got Gringo Chucha again. Probably totally messing up the pronunciation there. Sorry about that. Hi, Kevin. Thanks for another lesson quiz. This is from Flawless Ear Training Unit 1, Quiz 1. I just wonder how useful it is to practice the D major chord in the chords versus interval section that is not in the key of C. I know people who believe that most ear training should be key-based. What are your thoughts on this? All right. I have thoughts on this. Yeah, well, the people that believe that ear training should be key-based are teaching you a trick. They are not teaching you to develop a flexible ear. And here's the thing about this. The D major chord is a secondary dominant in the key of C. It's very intentional that I included it. So what is a secondary dominant? In the key of C, if you go to the dominant, you get G major. That's a perfect fifth away. The dominant of G major, the second dominant, is D. So if you go to G major, you're now using a D major chord for the dominant. So in the key of C, it's not the first dominant, which would be G, it's a second dominant, the secondary dominant. So that's your D major chord. So this is setting the stage for you to break out of what is familiar to you and to start hearing secondary dominants, because they are still based on the fifth. And this whole series right now is teaching you to hear the fifth in multiple different ways. And it's also teaching you to hear that weird major 2 chord, which doesn't occur in a major key. Normally, if you're writing in the key of C or whatever key, the second scale degree is going to be minor. And so if you hear, I don't know if this will come out or not because of the Zoom session, but here's a C major chord. This is what D should sound like. But if you have major, all of a sudden that sounds unique. That sounds different. So it's useful to practice with D major because in this particular unit, we did focus on C, G, and D, and I don't want to introduce minor chords right now. Now you'll notice that throughout unit 1, 2, and 3, minor is not addressed. We're doing that for a reason. A lot of people have a really easy time identifying a major chord, and that's great, But then what happens is when we start to introduce all the other chords, the major chord gets confused, believe it or not. It's just like the octave. At first, the only interval you might be able to hear is the octave. And I always would laugh. My students would say at the end of the year, yeah, I can hear all the other intervals, but the octave I can't hear anymore. And that's just very normal, because what happens is that really transparent interval, it starts to take on the characteristics of other intervals. So I don't want to introduce a minor chord. I want to keep it major. And D major is a secondary dominant of C. And so the logic is there. That's why I'm doing it this way. I also don't want you to be completely focused on major scales yet, because hearing major scales is a great ear training technique. But in the beginning, I don't think it's as useful as people think it is, right? I think that you really need to focus on just hearing these major chords, perfect intervals, perfect fourths, for a very long time before we start to add things like the minor chord. And that way, if we do it this way, and you're not doing other ear training programs, I mean, I hate to say don't do other ear training programs, but a flawless course is enough. It's plenty of time, right? And so if you start adding other things, you're diluting it a little bit and you're confusing the ear, because I'm being very methodical in this course. So yeah, no, I don't think that D major is a problem. I know that some people believe that ear training should be key-based, but me personally, I'm not worried about that, because I'm not training you to be stuck in a key. There is logic to training on a key. And one of the things I'm doing here, where I introduce the C, the little meditations that I have at the beginning of some of the lessons, that is starting to help you hear scale degrees. When we get into chord progressions, I am going to have you hear chord progressions, but the secondary dominant fits within the chapter of the perfect fifth. So there is logic. You can trust me on that. Really good question, though. So thank you for asking that. A lot of times these are things I kind of want to answer in the course, but then every lesson is going to be 4 hours long. And that's what's happening right now. I'm answering these questions, and who knows how long this will be. Oh, okay. So for lecture 8, musical form in the 20th and 21st century, MASOODYAZDI. Thank you for your question. You asked, thanks for your video, but where does this term organic form is coming from? Schoenberg. Okay. So this is a term that when World War II happened, it lost favor because Hitler really had, see, if you talk long enough, you always end up talking about Hitler. It's the oldest internet rule, right? But Hitler had kind of this holistic view, and they sort of supported the idea of organicism. And so it lost favor, and we went to science, more rational thinking. We wanted to get away from things that created horrible disruption in the world, in a nutshell, right? Because this isn't a history course. But a term organic comes from Schoenberg. He talks about organically developing an idea. He talks about the principles of organicism. I think I actually talk about it in the beginning of this lecture, but there are 3 aspects of organicism, and Schoenberg only agreed with 2 of them. And so this is something that I might do a more intensive video on, but I'm pretty sure I talk about it in my Elements of Music composition book, because in that book, people they either love it or they hate it. I mean, it's kind of interesting. But in that book, I do have an entire chapter devoted to it. And so I don't really want to get into it now because I explain it better in that book. But I would recommend, you can even look from the 3rd edition, which I think is cheaper, but you can look to that. At some point, I can create a video here, and I'm going to actually make a note about that to make sure I do. I will create a video that explains to some more detail, because it deserves even more than just a simple explanation. But to answer your question, it came from early 20th century composers like Schoenberg. He talks a lot about organicism, and there's 3 parts to it. It's also sometimes referred to, it's similar to Gestalt theory, but Schoenberg only believes in 2 points. So I'm actually just going to make a note right now to create lecture on organicism. See, the way that I schedule my day, because I do a lot. I mean, you guys have probably seen this. I actually use an app called Motion, and I don't use it to schedule my day because I hate that. I want to be able to go in and do what I need to do. But what I'll do is I will schedule in my calendar the things that I want to accomplish each day. So like today, after this, I need to focus on editing my hybrid themes lecture for my form analysis course, because I'm going to make that available here too soon. And I don't like scheduling that in things like Motion, because it does weird things. It's like, okay, you have to work on it during this time. But if there's something that comes to me, an idea, because the ADD, right? What I'll do is I will just create a new task for it, and then it will just schedule it when I'm in a mood to do something different. So let's say after this, I don't feel like doing hybrid themes. I'll go and open up the Motion calendar, and I'll say, oh, okay, I could do this instead. And it allows me to address these things eventually. So if you ever ask me something and I say, I'm slated to do that, that's what's happening, is I've put it in motion. I'll get to it eventually during my downtime. And I like it that way, because if you don't finish something, it just keeps pushing it further and further forward to the next day. I tried using reminders at one point, but those are stale and stagnant. And you end up having 4,000 past due reminders. So I like that motion just keeps moving it forward until you're in a place where you can actually go back and do things. All right. Let's see if there's more questions. Yeah, audiate doesn't even appear in the dictionary. It doesn't appear in any dictionary. So Bakajahu. Thank you for your question. And I get this a lot. A lot of times musicians, they know what they know, and they're very talented. And we get into these pedantic discussions about terms and things like that. But audiate is a term. It was invented by Dr. Edwin Gordon, and he actually uses audiate in a different way than I do. So he has a very particular view of audiation. And in his view, audiation is not simply hearing a song in your head. You have to know everything about the song. You have to know the rhythm, the measures, the beat, the intervals, the chords, the time signature. You have to know everything about it. And so that's, in a nutshell, his view of audiation. My view of audiation is more practical in a way, because it's, can you use it to compose music? That's where I'm coming from. And when I write, I will use audiation to create the work. And so audiation is not a term that has been adopted yet, but it's been around since 1980s. And before that, we just called it inner hearing. In fact, I was noting that when thinking back to the David Lucas Burge course, his relative pitch course, and I think he talks about it. He uses the term inner hearing because we hadn't come across the term audiate yet. But he was sort of an accomplished musician, Edwin Gordon, and he invented the term. And so for those of us that are deeply involved in audiation, we use the term because it's a simple way of explaining a complex system of tasks, like being able to hear things internally. So yeah, it's not in the dictionary, but it is jargon. And often there are lots of terms in music that don't occur in the dictionary. You're not going to find secondary dominant or applied dominant in most dictionaries. You might find it in a musical dictionary, right? You might find it in a theory textbook. So specialized texts often have terms that are not used. If you're a scientist, there are all kinds of words that are not in any dictionary, but they are in the tools of the trade, the textbooks you use, the lectures your professors gave, the things you learned in medical school. So yeah, that's all that is. It's a real term. I'm not making it up, but it's based on jargon, which, if you're not involved in audiation at a deep level, maybe you'll never come across it. But if you listen to my channel, you're going to learn about it. It's pretty much everything I do is based on audiation. All right. Iwashi dash Z6M. So NIWASHI dash Z6M. Flawless ear training, unit 1, lesson 1. Okay. Started about 3 weeks ago on the first 3 flawless example videos. Good, you understand their example videos. Everything there achieved 100%, so moved on to this one today. Yeah, that makes sense. They're easy, the first 3. Not for everybody, though. But they're meant to be at kind of a basic level so that everybody can get a foundation without struggling with the exercises. All through each video, including today's, I struggle with the chord interval recognition. Again, similar question. This is one of the hardest things to hear. It seems my ear fill in the missing notes and make everything sound rich and full until I hear the chords next to each other. Then it becomes more obvious. It's because I hear the overtones, perhaps. Thoroughly enjoying the process, though. Great work, Kevin. Thank you. All right, let's talk about this. So, yeah, when you play a chord, it has a fullness to it. When you play an interval, it's missing something. This is something that we talk about actually in music theory. So if you have a major chord at the beginning of the measure, and then later on, you just have that interval, we assume it's a quality of the chord you heard at the beginning, because once you hear that major chord, your ear does fill in the missing note, even though that third is so important to the quality of the chord. And so your ears filling in the missing notes is one of the things we're working on, and it doesn't happen overnight. This is why I changed it excuse me, a little yawn there. This is why I've changed it from doing exercises daily and working to 100% to 3 days or 1 day at 100%, because you're going to get a lot of practice on chord versus interval, and you're going to start to develop that ability. So if you play them in comparison, yeah, it's easier if I play a major chord first and then you'll hear the interval clearly, or if I play an interval then a major chord, you'll hear the major chord clearly. But you don't need to worry too much about this, because it will start to develop and it takes some time. It could have something to do with the overtones. It's possible you're hearing an overtone, but if I play a chord down here, this is an interval, and you hear an overtone, you're probably hearing the third up here. See if you can hear that. Probably not in the audio here. Play it lightly so you can hear the note. So if you're hearing that as part of the chord, this E down here is very different from this E up here. And that's something that people with perfect pitch do, is they don't hear the octave displacement of things so well. And not everybody, of course, but a lot of people with perfect pitch, it's kind of one of the downsides. And so if that's happening to you, it could be a really good sign that maybe you have that aptitude for perfect pitch. Because if you're hearing the overtones, especially, your ear's picking up on all these different notes, right? But the goal of this exercise is to train the ear to get to the root of what's really there, and not these sort of musical illusions we hear. They're not illusions, they're real notes, they're there. They're overtones. But if you're hearing overtones, then you have more work to do than everybody else, because you have to learn to separate what's strong from what's weak. So in a sense, it means, I'm not going to say a really good ear, but a really sensitive ear, because you can hear the overtones pretty clearly. That is a distinct possibility. But whatever the case, what you want to keep doing is just keep pushing through the exercises so that you can eventually develop kind of this more cultured hearing where you don't mistake the major triad for a perfect interval. And to be honest, sometimes I'll do that too, especially if it's really low. That's the fourth. When you play really low, you just hear the overtones more clearly and it gets muddy. So it's harder to differentiate between the notes. So that can happen. So don't worry about this. Just follow the rule, 3 days, keep going. You know, there's supposed to be a challenge in every lesson. If you're going through and everything's easy, that's great. Keep going until you find the place where you hit a wall. And you will hit a wall eventually in this course. But for most of us, it's going to be, there's a few exercises that are difficult, the rest are easy. That is by design, because we want you to have something that gradually develops each day and that is easy, and something that is hard. That's where the challenge comes from. And that's where the ear pulls on the other exercises so that you can really develop this skill. Oh, wait. Funny. I think, do I have other people? I invited my students to this. So yeah, some students are here. They can actually ask questions if they want to, but I think they're just being quiet. So, all right, let's do another one. All the questions you ever wanted to ask. The myths of perfect pitch. This is from my podcast. So the myth of perfect pitch development, episode 9 for your music mentor. Besides memorizing, sight seeing, what do you suggest to improve auditory working memory? Is there specific things that your students did? Can you suggest a systematic program for this? Also, do you think memorizing sentences, word lists, etc., can help to improve this ability? I think anything you do to improve your ear is going to help with your memory. So thank you, dodecahedron-12. This is a good question. And he's one of my members. I've seen him posting before. So actually, I don't know. Guy, girl, could be either. So I don't actually know. But the question is good. So improve auditory working memory. That the answer is actually very simple. I'm hesitating here because there's a lot to this question. So I think I'll attack the second part of it first. Memorizing sentences, word lists, etc., can help improve your ability. Anything you do to improve your memory will improve your memory, right? But I do think that memorizing word lists and things like that use a different part of the brain. And I'm no neuroscientist, but in my experience, there was a time I was in a car accident uh, many years ago at this point, and it was a pretty bad car accident, and I had a traumatic brain injury, and I had bleeding on the brain, close head injury. I mean, it took me a while to get back to normal. I had my jaw wires shut, and I went back to school teaching like that. I was teaching in a middle school at that point. And when this happened, I would try and I would do weird things. Like I'd go to the fridge to get orange juice and I'd grab a pencil instead. So there was like a disconnect. I was grabbing the orange juice in my mind, but a pencil was in my hand. And so I do think that there are certain things that can be improved, certain types of memory that can be improved, because my musical memory wasn't affected by this, but my long-term memory and just the way I thought about the world was affected. And again, I'm not a neuroscientist, so this is all just me talking about an experience. But I think that if you want to develop musical memory, it makes the most sense to work on musical things. And so the dictations, every time I give you a dictation in the flawless course, try and memorize it. Spend a couple minutes to memorize it. That's not ear training, that's memorization. So try and visualize it on the staff, try and really remember it the next day. If you can do that, that's developing your auditory working memory, because you're developing memory for these really weird dictations that I gave you. You can also use my practice dictations and try and memorize one at a time. Go through the process. I guide you through it, do the dictation, and then when it's over, write it out by hand, and then try and come back the next day from memory, write it out. Don't even listen to the recording. And then keep coming back each day and working on it until you've memorized dictation 1, then go on to dictation 2. That would be, I think, the best thing you can do for this. Later on in the course, I do start helping you develop your memory, because we're going to play 2 chords instead of just a major chord, and what is it? We're going to play multiple things where you have to actually memorize the order for it. So my suggestion is you go through the flawless course, you memorize the dictations as they come up, and then if you want to expedite this, memorize the practice dictations as well. Dictations are really useful for developing your working auditory memory. Past that, memorize the music you're playing. If you're a performer, don't just read from the sheet music, try and memorize that. But don't get caught up in doing like 6 hours a day of techniques to just develop your ear. Be a musician, play, do things that will make you a more effective performer. Go out, memorize the music you're playing, things like that. Memorize these dictations. These will have a pretty profound effect over time. So I don't think you need a separate program for that, or maybe you do. Maybe you can create one, but that's my recommendation for that. Good question. All right, so Appsuripol, Appsuripol. Perfect pitch drill, stage 2. Okay, is it okay that I sit at the piano and react by pressing the key instead of naming it out loud? Sometimes I got the right note name, but different octave. Okay, so my answer to this, if you are reaching out and pressing keys on the piano, you're developing sort of a muscle memory for it, which could be effective, because you may find that your fingers naturally start gravitating towards the right key. And I don't think that's a useless benefit. And so I think maybe you could do that, but I don't think it's going to help you develop the pitch discernment. And I don't think it's going to do the other effect of this, which is if you don't develop perfect pitch, you're still developing a more perceptive ear. So I would say you can do that if you want to, but at some point you should also, maybe in the same day, so maybe do the exercise twice. First time, maybe go to the piano. Second time, just sit, listen, and get used to the sounds of these notes. Just try and internalize them, try and hear them. That's my recommendation. Okay. So it's okay that you do it, but make sure you do it in the way that I've kind of recommended as well. Because I'm not trying to help you become a performer with perfect pitch or use a tool to develop perfect pitch. We want to develop your own mind to be able to start hearing the subtle differences. And again, even if you don't hear this is a C, this is a D, maybe you can start to hear that C has a quality, that D has a quality. And that will open up your ear for other ear training. That's the goal here. Good question. All right, let's see what else we got here. I think we'll take a few more, and then that may be it for today. So play dash QP9FN. Perfect pitch drill stage 2. I'm getting a lot of questions on these. So now we're dealing with the notes C, D, and E. When I hear the note, I imagine different shades of darkness and brightness. Is this okay, or should I just leave my mind completely blank? If you're doing it naturally, so I play a C and it feels clear to you, I don't think there's any problem with that. If you're not manufacturing it and saying, okay, I'm using relative pitch, but I know that's a C I just heard, I'm going to imagine it as light and the D is dark. If that's coming to you naturally, don't push any of that stuff away, because people that have perfect pitch, they often will associate tones with multiple different aspects of their existence. Like there may be an emotion, a color, a feeling, like sadness, there could be emotions attached to it. And a lot of the people I met with perfect pitch, they say that it's attacked from multiple angles. And they just, like if you see the color red, you might feel energized. If you see blue, you might feel relaxed. It's similar to the pitches they hear. There's an emotional attachment usually. So if you're seeing shades of darkness and lightness, I think that's fine. Just don't focus on that aspect of it. Let it come naturally and just try and focus on what makes each note different. Awesome questions. All right. Okay. I believe this is guitar JYM. I believe for me, seeing the staff note along with the tone would provide a stronger connection as it will help to read notes. Right now, they're floating down in space with no anchor. Perfect. I want them to float in space with no anchor. That's the goal. Let them float in space with no anchor. Okay. Seeing the staff note. I am intentionally not doing that because you're going to be focusing on the staff and you're using your visual acuity now. In fact, what I want you to do is shut your eyes, let them float in space. Don't even try and identify them if you're having trouble, and just say, oh, there's that note again. Oh, that's a different note. Oh, I recognize that note again. Oh, that's a different note. I don't know what it is. So you're on C and D right now. It's just 2 notes, and you're probably past that by now. But with C and D, you're just kind of like, okay, cool. Oh, that sounded different. That was kind of cool. I don't know what that was, but it has a different quality. Oh, no, that one sounds like the first one I was hearing at the beginning. Okay. I'm starting to recognize that note. It sounds different. Okay, there's the original note again. Okay, so that must be C, and this is D. And so you take this kind of relaxed approach. You do not associate visuals with them, especially something as specific as a staff system. I mean, this goes back to the reason I think most of us don't develop perfect pitch is because it's a subtle ability. And we try and make it something that we force our ear to hear. So we don't want to do that. So you just relax and you listen to the sound of these notes and you just get used to them. That's all there is to it. All right. Okay, Dan Bruca, DanBruka. And yeah, I do realize that I'm helping out some channels here, potentially. I mean, it's not my channel's not huge or anything, but I'm giving you a little bit of recognition here. 10 hours. Who the hell sleeps for 10 hours a night? Oh my God, if I could only imagine 2 hours these days before waking up, needing the loo, and then sitting down to think about practicing music. Okay, this is what I mean. People are funny. They just say funny stuff. So this is the perfect fit, passive ear training for sleep, meditation, and work, 10 hours. So the idea here is that, I know it's a joke, but the idea here is that you're not actually listening for 10 hours and you're not just doing this 10 hours of having it in the background and suddenly you'll hear the perfect fit. That will never happen. It just won't. But if you are doing the more active drills like my flawless course or dictations and things like that, and you're a musician who's paying attention to what they're hearing, then something like this, if it helps you sleep, can help. When I was a graduate student, I created these intervals and I would put them on a loop. If I had the ability to create a 10-hour loop, I would have done it. But back then, I just had my audio players, probably like I'm going to age myself, an iPod where, I would just put it on loop and hear it all night long. And I felt that since I was trying to develop an ear quickly, it actually did help. It actually did help me to get into the sounds of these. But I would do one interval at a time. And I was doing a lot of active ear training along with it. So yeah, the idea behind 10 hours is so that it doesn't go off when you wake up after 6 hours. I mean, me personally, I usually get 6 hours of sleep and then I'm awake. And when I was in college, it was like 4. So I needed less sleep when I was younger. But the idea is that it doesn't stop in the middle of your sleep and then all of a sudden you wake up. So that's why it's 10 hours. Just to give, see, there's a reason for it, All right. It's funny. So dodecahedron -12 is back again. Perfect fifth, passive ear training for sleep. Okay, get a lot of questions on this. Do you think listening to this with a meditative state about 20 minutes a day and in sleep improve performance while doing an active ear training? Yeah, that's kind of what I just said. So I do think that if you can get in a little bit of a meditative state where you're just absorbing the sound of the perfect fifth, and then if you use it in sleep at a very low volume, I mean, this cannot be at a volume where it is disrupting everything else going on in your life, right? And this is something that, they've done some studies on where white noise is actually bad for you to sleep with, is what they seem to be finding. But, so you don't want this to be loud. I think at a barely perceptible volume would be perfectly fine, just to have a little bit of noise in there. And it could actually tune out some other noises. So you might sleep a little bit better because it's very rhythmical. It's very expected. So yeah, I think that doing this for just 20 minutes a day would probably help. And then if you do it in sleep, you can do it, but don't do it forever. Use it when you're introducing a new interval. So when you're introducing the perfect fifth, when you start unit 1, for example, maybe up until 2 weeks into the lessons, you can use these passive ear training things and then stop. Because at that point, I don't think it's going to have an additional value. And I think your sleep is better if it's undistracted and you get actual quiet sleep. So that's my answer for that. All right. Let's see what else we got here. Okay, Gringo Chucha for flawless ear training, unit 1, lesson 2. Thanks for another lesson. I'm making progress slowly but surely. That's the idea. So that's good. I still have trouble hearing the major third of the high register though. I wonder if this happens to other people as well. Yeah, don't worry about that. The high registers are definitely harder to hear, and it's normal. But if you keep going through this, you're going to keep getting acclimated to them, and eventually you will be able to hear those high registers. So yeah, that's perfectly normal. What you're experiencing makes 100% sense to me. Okay, this is the last one I'm going to take today, and I don't know the answer for it. Is there a reason these videos can't be downloaded with the app? It's a shame because I don't always have internet with the introductory videos. I could download them to do later. Cheers. Okay, so I wonder if it's because the introductory videos are public. Maybe because you're doing a members only video at the time, because I had to make this members only when I lost my job, and still trying to find solutions for that. But I lost my job, and so I had to monetize a lot of this stuff. And frankly, it worked, and it helped me stay afloat for many months while I was trying to kind of get this YouTube thing and business aspects going. So I think what the issue is, I didn't have an answer, now maybe I do, is if it's a member only video, YouTube probably has to check to make sure you're a member, and if you're offline, it can't check. So now that I'm opening these up to the public, maybe you can download the app, the videos again. And I haven't decided. I actually wonder what your opinion on this is, everybody. So I'm going to ask you a question. And if you made it this far, I'll know you watched the whole video. I don't know anybody that's going to watch this whole video, but here's the thing. I would actually very much like to make the entire Flawless course and maybe everything free on YouTube. But if I make it free on YouTube, there's not really an incentive to sell it elsewhere. And so I think what I'm going to do is make Unit 1 available, but then based on how it does, if the channel grows, I actually think that that could be enough, and I could just provide these videos free and teach private lessons, to make up extra income. Because at this point, while I haven't ruled out the possibility of going back to a university, it's been since May of 2024 now, and we're now in April of 2025. And I've been able to pay the bills, and I've been able to get by. And I really like the freedom to be able to do exactly what I want to do and teach exactly the way I want to teach. And I think even if you're a tenured professor, there's still a lot of rules, regulations, things you kind of have to follow, things you have to be aware of. Meetings, faculty meetings are so much fun. There's all these things that you really have to pay attention to. And so while I would be very enthusiastic about taking a job if one opened up that really met my expectations, I don't know that it's necessary, and I may continue to just kind of run my Your Music business. So I'm wondering what you think about that. What would you do? Would you make everything free and just try and hope that your channel grew? Or would you put things kind of behind a paywall where you have memberships for certain things and other things are free? What would you like to see? I'm very curious to know. And I think I'm going to leave it at that for today, but I'll see you again next week. And again, so I did have the chat window open, but let me see. If you have a question, then feel free to post it in the chat when I do these, because I'm going to see how this works. I don't know if it's going to be, there's latency, or maybe the video is horrible, but if the video is good, I'm going to keep doing this every week this way, and I can see the live chat. And if you want to post a question, you can ask me and then I'll answer it. So keep that in mind. And thank you for those of you that joined me. And I hope that you have